Hello and welcome to another episode of Father and Joe. I'm Joe Rocky here with Father Boniface Hicks. And Father, in our last episode, we discussed the fruits of the Spirit, fruits of what our goals ought to be. And one of the things that I have always been ponderous of, and it's not something I actually think I've seen in the gospel, but it's ended at the end of some versions doing a rosary, which is, I don't even know if it's a prayer. It's a sentence that says, may we be made worthy of the promises of Christ. And that is something that it's always the last thing said whenever you're doing that certain type of rosary. And I know it's designed to make you think, because that's what it's doing to me. And there's two parts of that get in my mind. The first was, well, what does I need to do to be worthy? And hopefully that's what the last episode articulated a little bit. The list of fruits of the Spirit are what to look for. And again, going back to that episode, not focusing on building those roots, but building the healthy tree that can create the fruits. And what I wanted to get into there was, it's one of these things with the faith that, I don't know, it's one of those like tension points that you talk about a lot, where I'm just like not totally sure like how to feel all about it. Because on the one hand, we talk about things like the Beatitudes and how God is constantly forgiving, constantly want us to be inviting to us to come and be better, and so forgiving. But on the other hand, there clearly is if you don't show up and perform, there's going to be a problem. So there's a tension in there. And really, I guess this is a very complicated thought that I have not figured out how to streamline at all. So I apologize to everyone for me kind of weaving in the road here. But where I'm trying to understand in my own personal journey of this is, when we talk about the promises of Christ and the unification, I've always assumed it would be heaven. But obviously in the Our Father, our job is to bring heaven here on earth. And the ways that we do that is things like having a healthy tree that can bring the fruits of the Spirit here with us. But we seldom talk about what happens if you don't do that. Because you see people that from the outside in, again, it's not always profitable putting your spotlight on someone else, but we are people, because I think this is a human being thing, that gauge things relative to others. So, for instance, what I mean by that is, when I look around compared to other guys my age, I feel like I don't look unhealthy. But when I go to do a blood test, I failed it across the board. Like, relatively speaking, looking at my eyes, like, oh, I'm doing pretty good. But when you actually look at hard reality, not really. So when I bring this up in the spiritual context, because I don't think this is like high school where we get judged on a curve, for lack of a better way of trying to put this here. And I feel that many people can get caught into that trap so naturally of, well, at least I'm not that bad. At least I'm better than most of these people here, and could be completely missing the boat. And again, kind of where I am in my physical example here, I look like I'm healthier than everyone else, but that's not what my blood says. So I want to try to talk about that, because I think you understand what I'm saying here from a spiritual context. And I don't think I'm the only person who's ever had this question before.
Yeah, well, it's and let me know if I miss something. But I think an important thing is to be sort of in the process. I really like. I was at Seek the first week of January, and Monsignor Shea gave an excellent keynote. I didn't hear a lot of the talks at Seek. I heard his talk. I thought it was excellent. I'm told by people later he knocked it out of the park compared to everything else there. So if you're going to look up the talks for Seek and check out Monsignor Shea's keynote, really did an excellent job. But one of the things he said is the only way to lose is by giving up. Because Christ has won the victory for us, the one thing we need to do is persevere. The one thing we need to do is not give up, and he'll carry us the distance. So I just want to say that up front. It's the only way that the enemy wins is if we give up, if we stop reaching out, if we stop asking for help, if we stop crying out for Christ and receiving his forgiveness and his healing and his mercy. And so I think that's really important to recognize, because that doesn't follow through with the physical analogy. If your blood's bad, and I hope it's not too bad, Joe.
It's just got to change the way I eat type thing. The standard, eat better, exercise more.
I got you. So, if that's bad, like eventually you're, the physical is, it doesn't matter how good you look. If the blood's bad, you're going to die. It's not going to make it. And whereas in the spiritual, a lot of things can be bad, but if the one thing that you hold on to is perseverance, that you don't give up on God, that you don't give up on yourself, that you keep beginning again, that'll carry you the distance. So I just want to say that there's never a reason for despair. That's another way to say it. No matter how bad things are, it's not too late. So that's really, really good news. That's profoundly good news. The same is not true with, the blood or the cancer or the, a lot of other kind of physical diagnoses, or, the diagnosis around your business. It's like, there is a point of no return. There is a way that the debt can pile up. The problems can be so bad. You can get so far behind in school that you can't catch up. In other areas of life, there is a reason to give up. There is a reason for despair in that sense, that there's no hope of this getting better. That's never true in the spiritual life. So I think it's a really important distinction to make. Having said that, as we're plugged in, okay, I got that, Father. I'm never giving up. No matter what happens, I'm pushing through. Now, how do I know that I'm still making progress? How do I know that I'm still taking steps? How do I not get fall under an illusion that things look good from the outside, and so they must be good? And that's where we are paying attention to our hearts, and those fruits of the Holy Spirit are certainly a great indication of that. And a way to look at that is, we could ask a question then, and I really like this way of even approaching the sacrament of confession, because it's a related question. What do I need to confess? What should I confess? What's appropriate to confess? What can I confess in a way that will be helpful for my spiritual growth? And then we want to say, what's getting in the way of your relationship with God? So that's a useful way to approach it. When do you not look like a saint? That's a useful way to approach it. Sometimes our ideas of what a saint is need to be adjusted a little bit, but it's a good starting point. When do I not look like a saint? Well, when I'm, blowing up on my colleague, or when I'm blowing up on my spouse, or when I'm, okay, that doesn't look terribly holy. So let's look at that. And, by the way, the fruit of peace is certainly gentleness, self-control. There are a number of things that are missing there to evaluate it according to the fruits. Maybe it's, maybe I have a lot of anxiety around something, and I say, I feel like a saint would be more peaceful about these things. What could I do about that? And I just was teaching my spiritual direction class last night, that is to say, the night before we're doing this recording, and we were reading an article by Alison Cook that I really recommend on handling anxiety. She has a blog and podcast and books, and she's a marvelous person. It's chapter 10 of her book, Boundaries for the Soul. But she talks about anxiety. Now, the thing we don't want to do is judge and condemn that part of us. So we can note, all right, so this is just like the anger, blowing up on somebody. This doesn't look very holy. Maybe this anxiety doesn't look very holy. So what do I do about it? I don't get angry at it. I look at it with some curiosity, some gentleness. What's it doing there? A lot of times it's trying to prevent something from happening. It's picking up on something. It was also a great part of Monsignor Shea's talk. He started out saying, there's a lot of people with depression, anxiety, and we're tempted to say, well, there are all of these things, wrong with them. They're doing this thing wrong. Well, maybe they're actually picking up on what a train wreck society is. Maybe they're actually sensitive to the amount of evil that's out there, the shredded relationships. And he went on and listed a number of things that are like, there's reasons to be anxious about these things. It's not just irrational. But what's underneath that? Now, this is departing from Monsignor Shea, going back to Alison Cook. What's underneath that? And can we ask that anxiety? Maybe the anxiety, what's it moving us to do? Well, it's moving me to, I just got to plan everything. I got to know everything that's going to happen. I need to know every minute of every day. And if I can get a little distance from that, and I can say, well, there's a part of me that needs to know that. And then if I ask that part, what are you afraid is going to happen if you don't know every minute of every day? And a lot of times that then bubbles up the fear of, well, things could go terribly wrong. I could end up hurting somebody. I might fail at something. Okay, now we're getting into where there's a fear that's driving this that's worth looking at. And sometimes I can bring that fear into relationship with another person or in relationship with God and say, I can hear the Lord say, even if you fail at everything, I love you. We're going to make it through this. Remember, Father Boniface said, all you have to do is not give up. You're in no danger of that. You're doing fine. So sometimes we can find what's kind of driving these things. Now, I just went down a whole pathway there, but just to say, back to the surface again, what's interfering with my relationship with God? What are the things in my life that don't look like the things that a saint would do? And that would be the contrapositive from all of those fruits of the Holy Spirit. Where am I not loving, not gentle, not patient, not kind, not generous, not self-controlled, not gentle? Where are those things in my life? And then, again, we can start to pull apart why are those things that way, and how can we maybe let the Lord into those areas of our life a bit more.
Yeah, so many thoughts came out of that. First off, in terms of not wanting to or having barriers in your relationship with God, there's so many different analogies I could draw to this. But I think ultimately the one that's coming through clearest to my mind as I'm thinking this through is, if you've ever been in a room that has an intense bright light that has columns in it, you can go behind one of the columns and be in a spot of the shade. And there might be, depending on how bright the light is, actually can be an intense darkness in that spot. One of the cool things with physics. But how many of us just want to be close to it, where I don't want to be pure in the brightest spot, but I want to be in a spot where some of my activities I want to hide, just like a child. Like, something's wrong whenever your kids got quiet. Like, if they're upstairs being loud, you're more okay with it than they're upstairs being quiet. For parents of kids of a certain age, you know what I'm talking about. And I look at that and say, those activities that you want to keep in the shadows, those are probably the starting points of figuring out, well, then why am I keeping them in my life? If our whole goal ultimately knows that being in the light of God is what's going to make things better. And as we're approaching the sacrament of confession here, those are the things I'm trying to hide are most important, or what's really the barrier. There ought to be just take me as I am. And in any pure relationship, that's what it is. Your anxieties being one of those things in the list. Your quirks that you have that really are probably amoral at the end of the day for most of us when we think about it. So you run like a duck foot instead of straight line. Like, that doesn't really matter. There's no moral thing behind it. It's just the way that you developed in walking, whatever. But for some people, things like that are barriers that we think that we need to hide. And then once we get in that habit of thinking there's something that we should hide, it just becomes so much easier to put more and more there. And I think going along with what you were saying, as far as long as we don't give up, as long as we are willing to say the whole point of the Beatitudes, of being with God, of not giving up, is because he is forgiving. And he is calling us to be closer to him and to be willing to be shown. And to a degree, there's courage there. Absolutely, courage is part of that. But also just thinking about, what is it that I'm trying to hide in the shadow? What is it that I don't want to be seen about me, and why? And a thing is that our brains get so much sensory input in them at any given second, it's impossible to process it all. So to a degree, what you do respond to subconsciously or consciously, it's kind of a miracle in what was selected in the first place. Like, there's just so much data out there, and that's what your senses brought in. So when you do something that might be a little not the way you thought it would be, like I don't know why, I just keep scratching my beard, or I fiddle with my glasses, or whatever, your brain's picking up things that might be for a relationship with someone else that you're seeing, and you can't really identify why. And in some way, not to try to go down this weird rabbit hole here, but in some ways, I feel like that is God living through you in a way you don't even realize, because you picked up on this cue instead of another, which caused your brain to have you act in one way or another. And obviously, we have the ability to train ourselves and be different, and be more perspective of the way someone does their eye movement changes or something like that. But in general, none of these reactions are inherently wrong. They're just little quirks that, for whatever reason, we don't like about ourselves. And I think that that's something to not be afraid of and not want to hide, and to really analyze ourselves from a perspective of someone who wants to love us unconditionally as a starting point. Why am I hiding something at all? And if I am hiding something, what is it? And how can we analyze that? So when you talk about what's the barriers of the relationship you have with God, that would be the starting point with me to kind of do that exercise and think about, that's where I'm at. So, Father, I apologize for talking so much here at the end of the episode. I want to give you a chance to conclude it and send people off to a great week.
No, I love those things that you were saying, Joe, about just kind of paying attention. And I think the more that we can do that with a little curiosity, it's why I appreciate the way we've approached this without saying, you don't have peace, you're bad. That's not the approach to this. Or like, I got a little twitch in my eye. I remember being with a priest friend of mine who's really tuned into his body, and he's like, my eye just started twitching. I wonder what that means. And I should pay attention to that. It's like, oh, good. Wow, he's really tuned in. Just asking those questions with a little bit of curiosity and compassion. I like to use those two words in particular. Just wonder why that is. And then sometimes we can discover, wow, it's because I'm actually carrying a lot of stuff. I'm carrying a lot of responsibility, and I'm maybe carrying some things that don't belong to me. Carrying responsibility for other people's problems. And anyway, as we tune into ourselves, we might see, there's some adjustments that I could make there, and that'll help me to live a holier and more peaceful life. So.
Yeah. And I love that, especially the part about curiosity. I firmly believe that curiosity is the key that opens so many relationships, possibly more than anything else. I think it's the skeleton key of all of the things you could have in your life. Just being curious naturally makes you connect. It's just a cool little thing to put out there. So we hope that everyone has enjoyed this episode. We do thank you immensely. Again, I feel like I say this every time I look at the stats. We broke our all-time high again last month. We thank you all for being with us, sharing us. The reviews are coming in. Again, even if you do a star review, not necessarily even a written one, it goes a huge way. We thank you all for doing it and helping us continue to grow. We will be with you again next week.